Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. In this episode, Dorsey interviews another special guest that will give you hope and inspire you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining me on another episode of the Dorsey Ross Show. Today we have a special guest host with us. His name is Chris Goldyn. He's a good friend of mine. And I wanted to do this episode because he is going to interview me and ask me some questions. And I wanted to do this in the month of June because it is, for most of you probably don't know what month it is, but it's the Apert Syndrome Awareness Month, which is what I have in my disability. And a lot of, people out there have this disability, although it is a very rare disability. My friend Chris is a good friend of mine. We've known each other for probably over 20 years now. And he and I went to Bible college together. And we met in Bible college and we became friends on the last year that we were in Bible college. So he is a great supporter of this podcast, and I wanted to have him come on and interview me. And if you go back quite a ways now in the episode list, you'll see his story and see his episode where I interviewed him as well. So, Chris, thank you so much for being guest co-host today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dorsey. I greatly appreciate it. And I'll just put in a quick plug for your podcast. I just want to say, Dorsey and I are very close friends. But with that being said, even if he wasn't, Dorsey's podcast is fascinating and he has really, really incredible guests on the podcast. And so I just encourage you guys to listen to every and any episode you can get your hands on. I've literally listened to every episode that you've done. And it's also cool just to see the variety of guests and just the show in general, how cool it is, how you're able to talk to a variety of people and minister to so many different types of people by getting different people on, some people from world missions to financial stuff to relationships and everything in between. So I just think it's really cool. And I'll just put in a plug for you that it's very much worth it to listen to the Dorsey Ross Show and share it with your friends and buy them a cup of coffee. It's a really cool way to donate to the show without giving much. So with that being said, I guess I'm going to take over the reins here as the host and interview you, Dorsey. So this is kind of cool for me because I've never gotten to do this before. So Dorsey, what I noticed that you like to do in the beginning of your podcast is usually have some type of icebreaker question. So I want to ask you, off the top of your head, what is a funny story that you could think of that involves the two of us from college or maybe, in the first couple of years of our friendship, that you would be willing to share with the audience that you think is a pretty good story?
Oh man, funny story that involves you and I together. That's a great question. I don't know if it's a funny story per se, because this is not in the beginning of our friendship, but it involves our friendship, and it's the time that we went out to Colorado together, and we went out to the top of Pikes Peak, and it is the highest peak, I guess, in Colorado, and it's so high in altitude that, I ended up, and like I said, it's not a funny story because it involved me getting sick on the top of Pikes Peak, but, it is kind of funny because of what happened, but, it was a interesting story to tell.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I will share one from college because I think it's worthwhile to go back since you and I are on this. And I just remember there was a funny prank that a couple of our friends pulled this one time. And I won't mention other friends' names on the podcast because I haven't asked them about this in advance. But there was a time where me and a couple of their friends switched your dresser with another one of our friends' dresser. And came back from your room and all your clothes were not there because there was somebody else's clothes and somebody else had your clothes, and that was a pretty funny exchange. So I thought that was funny, and we had a lot of pranks and stuff that we did in college, and I just thought that was worth sharing.
Yeah, I do remember that. I opened up my drawers and looking at my clothes. I'm like, wait, they are way too big for me. Where did my clothes go to?
Oh, good stuff, man. Good stuff. All right. So to try to get us in here to focus on something now that is a little more serious. So you had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that this is Apert's Awareness Month. I know you've shared this a few times, but just for the sake of this individual podcast, can you share for the listeners, what is Apert Syndrome?
Yeah, Apert Syndrome is a congenital birth defect which affects the hands and the face and even the toes of most people that have it. And most of the time when you're born with Apert Syndrome, your forehead, at least mine was, my forehead was pushed outward, my eyes and nose were pushed back into my head, and my fingers and toes were fused together, meaning I had no individual movement of them. And to this day, my toes are still fused together. In my one podcast I did with somebody else, they were interviewing me, and I said my feet were fused together. I was like, wait, not my feet. My toes are fused together. And, and they even asked me, did I ever think I would get my toes separated? And I said, at this time in my life, I said, I don't think I would ever need my toes to be separated because I walk pretty well. I used to, in my young age, I used to, outpace and outwalk everybody else around me. But, I don't think at this time I would need, that to happen. And, when I was born, my forehead was also fused together. I had no room and no skull opening to allow the brain to grow and allow the brain to function normally. And usually most babies are born with that sore spot to allow the brain to grow and allow the brain to function normally. And because of the fact that I didn't have that opening, the doctors, gave my parents really no hope for my survival and told my parents that, hey, we don't think Dorsey will survive. We don't think he'll make it, and that the best option that we can give to you is to put him into a institution and to let him be.
Yeah.
Thankfully, my parents are both, people of faith and both knew and trusted in God and said, well, we don't, we're not going to give up on him. We're not going to sign the papers over to put him into a institution. We'll, take him home and see what will happen, what God will do in his life.
Yeah. Thanks for that explanation. So yeah, you kind of dove into your story there a little bit. So how many surgeries have you had now up to this point, Dorsey?
Up until this point, I've had 68 operations over my lifetime.
Wow, that's crazy. So what did they do to make room for your brain to grow? What was that surgery like?
Yeah, as far as I know, most of my facial surgeries, what they would do, and you can't really see it now because the way they, fused it together, and the way they, my hair grew in and everything. But if I cut it short enough, you could probably still tell a little bit that there is a scar from my left ear to my right ear, where they would open that part of the skull open, and then I guess they would, pull back the skin and, whatnot to operate on the bone and operate on that part of my face to open the skull open to make the room for my brain to grow. And they would operate on the different parts of my face to, as I grew, the bones and everything had to move with it, because they would move the skull and the bone structure to move that forward as well.
Wow. That's really unbelievable. Man, so you've really gone through a lot, and that's just medically. So tell us a little bit about what growing up was like for you. What was some of the challenges that you faced in school, socially, academically, physically, emotionally, all of that, spiritually? And then with that, I'll add a part B to the question. If you could name one or maybe two people besides your parents who were very, very key in helping just be somebody that was a support for you and your family, and that you could kind of lean on.
That's a big, that's a big question. Well, spiritually, thankfully, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were very, Christian. They took me to church. They weren't the type of people to, you know, keep me at home. They weren't the type of people to, keep me away from the public eye, or to keep me, hidden away somewhere where they would be like, hey, we're not gonna show our son off to other people. We'll keep him, in the public eye. We'll allow him to make friends. We'll allow him to go to church and, show him off to other people. And, I went to church as often as I could when I was younger. And, it was difficult at times because as I got older, I would start to ask the questions of faith of, why would a loving and caring God create me the way that he did? Why would he allow this to happen to someone? And, I started to, get those questions, or ask those questions, and try to get the answers. And I think one of the biggest answers is that we live in a fallen world, and unfortunately things happen, things take place in this world that, we don't always like the answer to. But I also started to realize that, as I got older, that, God had a plan and a purpose for my life. And I started to see, what that plan and what that purpose was. And to this day, I'm still asking God, what is the plan and purpose that you have for me in my life? Because I think throughout life, I think sometimes those plans and those purposes change. And, those the plans and purposes that God have for us change over time. And I accepted Christ at the age of 13 and started to go to the youth group and attend the youth group, where I felt loved and I felt accepted. On the opposite end of that, in the outside world, I would be, teased and made fun of and, called names like monster and freak. And, it was at those times where I felt like, ending my life. I felt like giving up. But again, God intervened and said, hey, don't give up. There's something greater in store for your life that I have for you. You may not see it at this moment, but it's coming. And, with the fact of my studies and with the fact of my schooling, it was difficult for me because I wasn't always in school, especially in elementary school. And there was long periods of time where I had to stay away. Well, not stay away, but stay out of school because of my recuperation from my surgery. So I would have to have someone come to the house and tutor me. And, they were part of the school system, so they knew where the class was at that time. So they would come and, tutor me and be like, hey, here's what's happening. So I would have to learn that way as well. But as I got older, even in junior high and high school, it was difficult for me. I didn't do well on tests. I didn't do well in, certain subjects. Math is one example that I didn't do well in. And, there was that part of life that where I struggled with schooling. And what was the second question you asked me about P?
Yeah. So I said, could you name one or two people besides your parents that were a really major support in you and your family's life and kind of just there for you guys?
Yeah, I would say, definitely the youth, one of the youth pastors in the church where I grew up. He was definitely one of them. And then, one of the youth leaders as well. And I remember the one story that I can tell from that with the youth leader is, he told me one time, he said, Dorsey, I see you standing on stage sharing your story. And, back then, this was probably when I was 18, 19 years old, I didn't think that that's what I would be doing. I didn't think, because I had a speech impediment, and you'd probably hear a little bit of it in these videos. But back then, it was, not as bad, but it was worse than it is now. And I had to go through speech therapy growing up. I went to, speech therapy classes in elementary and high school. And for the most part, I hated it. I didn't understood why I was there, but I still didn't really care for it. And, I'm glad now looking back, I'm glad I went to it because my speech is better off for it. And, but, as he told me that, I was like, oh, thank you very much. Thank you for that encouragement. And as I got older and I went to, community college, I went to Bible college, I started to think about what it was that, I wanted to do after I graduated, college and Bible college. And back then, as we all do, we have dreams of what we want to do. Some of it, what for me was, working with technology or working with computers. And, at one point it was possibly, returning the favor and working in the medical field as, maybe as a nurse or something of that nature. And then, I started to work with the youth as I got older in the leadership role, leadership position, as I do now in my home church in PA where I live now, because I'm originally from New York. And I started to, feel, hey, maybe youth pastoring is something that I would want to go into and what God would want me to go into. And that's what I studied at what is now the University of Valley Forge. But when you and I went, it was Valley Forge Christian College. And, step by step, I started to realize, hey, that's not what, that's not the door that's going to open up for me. So I was able to, go back home and give my story, 5-minute clip of my story of what God had already done in my life. And at that time, I felt the Holy Spirit speak to me and say, hey, that's what I want you to do. I want you to travel around sharing your story of what I have done for you in your life. And for the last 16 years or so now, that's what I have been doing.
Awesome. That's great. That's really, really, really good. What were some of your major challenges that you faced in college?
I would say definitely, in community college at least, and in Bible college to an extent, it was definitely, academic. The first few weeks of community college were very difficult for me. And at the time, my mom, was still alive. And I remember, and my parents were both, big supporters of me. They, throughout my life, they allowed me to figure out for myself what I could and could not do. And couldn't wasn't very much because they allowed me to say, hey, you want to do this, go and do it. You want to do that, go and do it. And, if you are unable to do it, you'll figure that out for yourself. And, I wanted to go on to college, community college, and they said, okay. And the first few weeks, again, were very difficult for me. And I came home one day and discussing with my mom, said, hey, I'm struggling. I don't know really what to do. And she said, well, take it a few more weeks and see what happens. And at that point, if you're still struggling, we'll, at that point, we'll discuss it and we'll see what happens. And I found out they had a meeting at church. It wasn't really a meeting, it was a service at church, and the guy there was discussing the Christian club Chi Alpha. And I went back to the community college at the time. I went back then. They found out that they had the Chi Alpha club on the campus. And I realized I went to the meeting for that club. And they were very welcoming, very open, to accepting me in that meeting. And from that time on to 4 years later, I felt, I had that support group where they would allow me to go and allow me to be there, and again, I, was able to move up and became a leader in that group. And that's where I met Kevin Bateman and then went down the road with him, went to Bible college with him, and then later on went to what is now Next City Church with him as well. But although I went to a Christian club, and met them and had that support group, it was still difficult for me to, in that college atmosphere, and at least in academics. And it took me a little while longer, to to graduate. It took me 4 years to graduate a 2-year to community college, and I still went on to, even after 4 years of, community college, I still felt like I wanted to go on to Bible college. And I did. And I went on to Bible college and, again, met Kevin and eventually met all my friends at Valley Forge. And, again, it was stressful. It was, tough at times, having some of those professors talk about stuff that just completely, flew over my head and others' heads, I'm sure as well. And you're like, what did he just say? And,
Yeah.
but again, I wanted to persevere. I wanted to continue on with what I felt and what I felt God wanted me to do.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and your timing worked out, very well for us as well. I mean, I've told you the story before, and but I just remember going to Valley Forge and opening weekend and orientation, and they did that go through the New Testament in like a day, if you remember that. I just remember seeing you from afar that first weekend and was like, man, like I definitely want to get to know that guy and get to know his story. And I don't know what it is, but I know God's done some amazing things in that guy's life. And what's interesting about Dorsey and my story is that like we kind of knew each other and had some mutual friends and even lived in the same building. But Dorsey and I's friendship really didn't take off until our senior year, our final year at Valley Forge, because we had some different friend circles, but they kind of intertwined here and there once in a while. And then, because you and I each stayed a little bit longer than some of our friends, it ended up being a blessing because, Dorsey and I ended up saying, hey, we're going to make time for each other. And I remember like going to the Christian bookstore on Friday nights and going to get a coffee or whatever, or going to Exton, stuff like that. That was a good time. All right. So moving on in your story, what have been some of the more challenging things that you want to mention about your adult life from Bible college to now? 2 or 3, really big challenges that you faced, and how has God carried you through them?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think one of the biggest challenges, and some people may look at it and say, well, that's not a challenge, but for me personally, I think it is, because for, I won't say for the most part, but I think as people, in my own opinion, people with disabilities, it's harder for them to find, a spouse, to find a girlfriend, or, to find a husband. And for me, it's been difficult, in my own opinion, to find a girlfriend, to find that woman of God that he has for me. And I don't attain to the fact that there's only one out there for me. There's too many people out there to only be that specific one person. But I think for me, I've had difficulties to, to go up to, not have. I mean, I've had friendships. I've had, friendship with people of the opposite sex who have been single. But I think going past that, that going past that friendship part, that have been difficult for me, because I've always wondered, the what if. What if I ask her, hey, would you consider going out on a date with me? Would you consider being my girlfriend? And the what if of her saying no, then what? Then what happens after that? What happens to that friendship? And I guess the other difficult thing would be, what, health wise, not knowing, yes, people with Apert can live, a normal life expectancy for the most part. But when when I was younger growing up, I would have, hearing over the loudspeaker of, hey, so-and-so passed away, and it would ingrain in your head, hey, who's going to be next? And will I be next? And as I get older, I wonder, how long will I actually live? How long will my life expectancy be?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the good news is Dorsey, that I don't even know if Apert separates that you very much, because I'm at the point where I'm like, oh man, I can't move around as well as I used to either. And so sometimes I think some of those questions myself. So I hear you on that. To get into a little more lighthearted conversation, Dorsey referenced earlier that he and I were in Colorado together. You guys are listening to this, but as Dorsey and I are talking, I could see his big Denver Broncos thing over his TV. And unfortunately, they're in a pretty rough position this year. But Dorsey, for those of you who don't know, is a sports fan and does love his Broncos. And we had an awesome trip out to Colorado where we got to go see them, and we saw them in Philly together.
And they lost both times.
Yeah, they lost both times. I know.
It was so bad in Philly that Peyton Manning was in the game, and it got pulled. He passed the, we saw him break the passing record, and then they pulled him in the second quarter because they were losing so bad.
Yeah, that was in Denver actually, and it was funny because it was against Kansas City, but it was before Mahomes, and they put Brock Osweiler in for him, and Brock Osweiler played most of the rest of the year, and then however, it ended well for you because the Broncos won the Super Bowl that year. And Manning broke his passing record. It was like all-time passing yards or something like that, and then they pulled him. But he was hurt, and that's why Osweiler played most of the rest of the year until the playoffs when Peyton Manning came back. So on a sports-related question, if there was any sporting event that you could ever go to, maybe this is an easy one for you, but what would be your bucket list sporting event thing that you would love to see at some point in your life?
Definitely the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I would love to go see the Super Bowl at some point.
Okay. All right. How about wrestling? You like wrestling too a little bit, right?
I do like wrestling. I don't keep and watch it as often as I used to. But if it was wrestling, definitely WrestleMania probably at some point.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't keep up with all who all is wrestling anymore.
Yeah, yeah. All right, and then a little more serious, but in the same vein, do you have any bucket list items on your list? Now, you mentioned before, and this has kind of always been in my mind, your tagline. What you can't do isn't very much. So do you have anything in your mind that is like a bucket list item that you really would like to do, before you kick the bucket at some point in your life? That's why they call it a bucket list. That's what it's called. So is there something, like jumping out of a plane or I don't know. Do you have anything like that, or even a career dream or goal or anything?
I mean, I thought about the possibility of jumping out of a plane at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
felt that, and I did go skiing one time, but it was on one of the little ski slopes. But it wasn't it wasn't one of the big ski ski slopes. But I wouldn't mind trying that again.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Um, Now you were referencing earlier, like sometimes, God, has different plans for us. And, I think what you're alluding to is like sometimes we picture things in our future when we're young, and then they end up looking a lot differently when we're older than we initially pictured them. And, actually for you and I, it's kind of similar. We both went to school and got bachelor's degree in youth ministry. And, I did some youth pastoring at my church, part time, and I've volunteered a long time for Youth for Christ in Northeast Pennsylvania here as well. So I have used that, but I never got full time, paid position for youth pastoring, and neither of you. But God kind of still keeps that fire in us. I got my feet in youth ministry, and you're, a volunteer in your youth ministry. So that's really cool. And God has used you to go and share your story with a bunch of people, which is also really awesome. So sometimes our stories just look different than how we pictured them, and that's okay because God still uses us, and that's pretty neat. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you would like to mention?
Yeah, well, I did graduate, as you said. We both graduated with our bachelor's degree in youth ministry. We both graduated on May 5th, 2005. Unfortunately, on the downside of that, my mom wasn't able to, to be there because she passed away in 2002. But but I know that she was, she probably knew about that and was probably hearing, me on at that point. And and right now I'm working at Target, which unfortunately, I mean, it is what it is. It happens that we sometimes need a second, second job, or we need a job to fill in, for income and whatnot. And it's something I didn't really want to do, to go back to retail, because I did retail for a little while before I went into full time travel ministry. And I didn't really want to do it because of the bad experience I had at the previous Target. But this time around, it's been a pretty good experience so far. It's been tough at times with a lot of it's been a good experience so far.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the experience you were referencing was just with one individual at the
Right.
previous where you used to live, right? Yeah, yeah. And that's the stuff that people don't realize. I mean, we're grown adults, you and I are both in our 40s, and you kind of think of bullying as something that just happens in schools, and but still on some occasions you still encounter some negative interactions with people. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to deal with some of those negative public interactions, and how you process them, and work through them, and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, there are times when I get stared at, or looked at, and most of it now, as I get older, most of it now is from young kids, or kids that may not fully understand why I look the way that I do. And I understand that, to a degree, why it happens, because they don't fully understand why I look the way that I do. So I, you know, I don't judge the kids as much as I judge the parent for not fully, explaining to them, that they're going to be, regardless of disability, that they're going to be people and adults, even kids, that are going to look different, from them, and that they need to understand that they need to, accept that fact and understand that fact. And I think we need to teach the kids when, as young as they are, understand that fact. That way, when they get older, they don't, become the bully. They become the friend. They become the acceptor of those people who do look different.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point. And for me as a parent with young kids, I mean, you're basically family to us. So I think it's just been great. Thank God for technology. Like even during COVID and stuff, like we were able to FaceTime you and have my kids see you at a very early age. So that way they can understand and treat you and others with respect and dignity right off the get-go and have hard conversations with our kids. And I think as a society, we've come pretty far too, because like when you and I were kids, everybody had, dolls and G.I. Joes and stuff, but now they even have toys that, some of the characters are in wheelchairs and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty cool. Because then it allows us to have hard conversations like that with our kids at an early age. So that's great. All right, Dorsey. Well, this has been a great experience for me to get to interview you and talk with you about some of your story. And again, I just want to encourage listeners to go back and listen to Dorsey's old podcast. He's got some good stuff out there. Dorsey also wrote a book. You can get a copy of his book anywhere books are sold. Dorsey's an amazing man in every way. He's an author, a speaker, a podcaster, an ordained minister, college graduate, youth leader, and to me, he's a brother and a family member. So, Dorsey, thanks for allowing me to interview you today. Do you have any questions for me?
What's a bucket list item that you want to do?
A bucket list item that I would like to do. That's a good question. I would say for me, bucket list item that I would like to do is I think I'd like to go back to school and finish my master's. I think that would be a bucket list item. I'm not sure I'm too eager to jump out of a plane, but but to go back to school and go for my master's and finish that and work with counseling kids. I think I'd love to do that. So I would say that would be mine.
Yeah, and it would be in counseling?
That's what I think. So, I mean, I could start pursuing it and end up going in a different direction. Who knows? But I think that's the direction that I would like to lean towards. So, yeah. Do you have any career bucket list items? I know you mentioned jumping out of the plane, but do you have any career aspirations or anything?
I thought for a while now, and I'm still looking into that direction of possibly, working with people with disabilities, whether it be Down syndrome or autistic, or even people with, facial, people with facial abnormalities as well.
Yeah, or like physical disabilities.
Yeah, physical disabilities.
Right. Awesome. All right. Well, again, thanks, Dorsey, and thanks for everyone who listened to this podcast. And it's your podcast, Dorsey, so I'll let you take us out.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for coming on and interviewing me. It was a great podcast, and maybe we'll, have you on again, and we'll talk, next time we'll talk sports and talk about LeBron James and the Lakers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like that. I'm not sure if your listeners would love that. You're always spreading positivity and encouragement. And right now, watching the Celtics be in the finals does not make me happy. So, so we could save that for a sports podcast. But yeah, I just thank you for being encouraging and inspiring and motivating, and sharing the hope that the Word of God, the Bible, and Jesus has for us, and how that's impacted others' lives through your different avenues and media and all that. And we just really greatly appreciate it. So thank you, Dorsey.
Yeah, definitely. Well, guys and girls, thank you again for listening and for coming on. Please like and share, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and any podcast platform you listen to, and also check out my website at www.dorseyrossministries.com. God bless. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. Please like, share, and tell others about the show. Also, please check out the other podcast episodes. And if you would like, donate to this podcast and buy Dorsey a coffee. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.